Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Table Manners for Robots. This is season 3 and it's episode 5. We decided to do something a little bit different today. We wanted to put together a series of your favorite clips based on subject. And today's subject is all about HR. So we've done a fantastic series of shows through the pandemic, through lockdown. We had the opportunity of interviewing some of the best minds around the world. And we were able to collect beautiful information that is now sitting on our YouTube channel and it's sitting on our show page. The trouble is that not everyone has the time to go through everything. So we decided to do you a favor and put together the best of the best clips from all of our various interviews on the subject of HR. So we've selected 8 of our top clips in no particular order or ranking. It might be that we just felt that these are super relevant based on the questions that we received and the comments that we received over time. So we really hope you enjoy the slightly different angle that we're taking, where we bring forward a compilation of what we've already done in the past, and we make it easy for you to enjoy these golden nuggets in what could be considered a compilation episode or an episode of specials. I don't know what you call it, but I'm just going to call it a compilation episode. All right, so let's start with our first Golden Nugget episode. We had the opportunity of interviewing Dumasani from SAP, a senior executive at SAP, and he did a fantastic, brilliant job of giving us context of remote work in South Africa, particularly looking at a very zoomed out perspective. He was excellent at being able to express the patterns that he observed, and we got excellent viewer feedback and comments on his interview. So enjoy this first clip.
I think the biggest realization for me was the fact that we have been always ready for remote working. The technology was there. Arguably, some companies hadn't invested sufficiently in that, but the technology has always been there. There's been enhancements of the technology, but by and large, it's always been there. What I think was a challenge was the trust element. I don't think we trusted our people to do what needs to be done autonomously and remotely and independently. So I think, COVID has forced us to trust each other. And I think it's absolutely going to continue. I've got no plans of getting back to work. Today is my first day back in the office since March.
Wow.
So I absolutely have no intentions of going back. I don't expect my team to come back to the office because, I quite appreciate, balancing productivity and balancing a healthy lifestyle, I've got young kids and I know that it's not practical to expect someone to work from 8 until 5 because I need to take my kids to school. They've got swimming lessons. They've got all sorts of things that they have to do. But I also appreciate as a professional that I need to start my day at 5 a.m. so that by 9 a.m. I've got time for the kids, and maybe around 3 p.m. I've got time for them. And in the evening, I'm going to put in another 2 hours. So I think trust was a key element or a key inhibitor of us progressing. But it's here to stay. We need to embrace it and figure out how to make it work even better than it's working now.
It's interesting. We might see an entire reinvention of the workday, huh? It's likely that the only reason why we bothered with an 8 to 5 in the first place is because we needed to show up at a workplace. The whole birthplace of the 8 to 5 was the fact that construct was made sense because we had to be in a specific space. But if we can work anywhere, it really doesn't matter really in truth when we start and when we take our first break and when we take our second break and whether we go a little bit into the evening, because for most information workers, people who use information as their core job function, the reality is that there's always going to be that portion of their job that they can do by themselves, where they just put their head down and get work done. So whether that's being done later in the evening when they have their most creative time, or when they're feeling free to just focus on their work, whenever that happens in the day, that's going to be acceptable as long as the outputs are there. But I think this all hinges on that core word that you used, which is trust. And ultimately, on that bedrock of trust, I think all of these wonderful things are going to be possible. A nice blast from the past over there. So while we go through these clips to do with HR, remember, this is still a live show. We still want your participation. I still am looking forward to you sending in your comments, your feedback, putting in some questions. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to line up the right insert in line with your question or interest or comment. For the next video, I'm very happy that we were able to get a senior leader, someone who is very accomplished in business, Andy from Plan IT. We got him to give us some commentary on some of the softer aspects of the people situation and the people transition that we are seeing right now. We looked at what are some of the more holistic effects on a person who is no longer connected with his or her teammates in the same space. What are the effects on that person? Let's hear what Andy had to say.
Obviously, one of the biggest things is adaptation and being able to rise to adapt to the situation at hand. I think applying your practice that you put in from a manual perspective can move over to an automated situation as well with workflow. Be diligent, check your emails constantly, watch for notifications that will come through that say you need to authorize something so that you can pass it on. Fortunately though, within this type of workflow environment, you can build in escalations, you can build in gatekeeping. So it warns other people in the chain to say, John hasn't done this, Joe hasn't done this, for example, so please chase. So physically, one would have to get up or go and move to an office or go and make a phone call, but John might be on holiday. What do you do then? So it's really about building in for those factors and making sure that they can be handled within the system, which they can, and making it a smoother transition. And getting people to recognize that, this remoteness or utilizing functionality in the IT world that has actually been there for a number of years already. It's just never been used by business because it's been untrusted. There's no confidence in it, but I can assure you it's robust, it's strong. And I think with COVID, some businesses have been forced to go into this remoteness. And I think with Teams meetings, etc., and webinars and that, it's shown that it can happen. And so there's no reason why it can't change.
All right, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you are saying that we need to look at the way in which we work being beyond dependence and reliance purely on email. There needs to be some kind of workflow that is set up that keeps us from having to depend on walking over to Ant's desk. So obviously, because we can't walk over to Ant's desk, we now need to have better systems and protocol in place, and we need to have some kind of workflow engine that's sitting behind the scenes that takes the requisition to Anne automatically and doesn't rely on you having to do too much manual intervention. So we are basically, in a nutshell, being forced out of old habits because COVID has imposed upon us something that we never really had to deal with in the past. Would you say that that's a fair-ish summary?
Yeah, yes, definitely. That's along the right track, yeah.
It is not only interesting for me to reflect on these older clips, it's also kind of interesting to see that we had quite a different setup back then. That camera was very, very close up. All right, so back to the topic at hand here. Remember, we welcome your questions, we welcome your comments. Feel free to just keep feeding them through on the chat box. You can put that into the chat box, into the Q&A box. It's totally up to you. We have someone monitoring both boxes at all times. So you can even send in a quick comment if you're enjoying it or not enjoying it, or if you want us to lean into one subject more than another, feel free to let me know. All right, for the next one. What we did was we had the pleasure of speaking to another senior executive from SAP who is very au fait with what's happening in industry. And she was able to bring a nice perspective on the scenario of remote work and people management, but for more than just about establishing better communication platforms. Obviously, communication platforms, electronic communication platforms make remote work possible. But what about workflow? What about the aspects that are more to do with the needs of people and the support that people need from an HR perspective? What happens in those instances? So let's hear what Isabel had to say about this.
If I have to think about the systems that I personally rely on to do my job, it's a great privilege that all of these are available to me, and they're all cloud-based. So whether I need to do performance and goals, my bi-weekly check-ins with our team to go through how they're performing against certain objectives, it's all online. It's transparent. We can have the same instance open. Putting through leave requests, getting basic support, and even tools needed, our customer relationship management solution or our global reporting tools to see how we're tracking on our major KPIs, to understand where we've got pipeline gaps, or where we've got customers that need specific assistance. It's really an immense benefit that these tools are all available. Even the very core of what we do, which is to facilitate customers with value management approaches, helping them benchmark and baseline their processes, helping them build value-based business cases. That they're all cloud-based tools, which makes it really easy to collaborate in a transparent manner. And it was interesting because at the start of COVID, we had a consultant that went through and did an exercise, one of our regional colleagues, and he went into the basic processes that are enabled by enterprise resource planning. And I think they came up with over 400 roles that are met, or that can be that work on ERP on a daily basis. Over 400 roles, over 400 best practice processes, and they analyzed that roughly 60% of those, between 60 and 65% of those, can actually be done remotely. That they absolutely, and I see Martin is nodding, and you will know more about this, of course, but it's a large percentage of roles, ranging from 99% of your finance function, if it's got the enabling technology in place, can be run remotely, to less so, maybe 30% of your manufacturing or your services. But by and large, you're looking at a large percentage of your organization that can actually be enabled with the right tools to work remotely, which I think is something that we all need to consider, because it's going to be, I think, a longer transition period than we initially hoped for, to get back to a working environment where we're all comfortable to be at the office at the same time.
Really good insights coming through. I really hope that you guys are enjoying this new compilation type episode that we've been able to put together. We've pieced together your favorite clips from the past, from historical shows. We've put them together in a format that's easy to digest. We've entitled this particular one, The Top 8 Things That HR Practitioners Are Interested in. And in order to respond to your request, we've put together 8 really good clips from our historical interviews that happened really no more than a year ago. So I think it's over the last year and a bit, we've collected clips and put them together. Now, what's interesting is for the next clip, we're going to be going to an interview with a senior leader from Melon Consulting. His name is Razan. I believe he is actually on the show as an attendee. So what's going to be funny is after we see what he has to say in response to my question, he might even be able to take a question from the chat box. I'm putting him on the spot there. None of this has been prearranged. But Razan, you can enjoy watching and reflecting on a clip of yourself. So the question that I asked Razan at this point was, from a technology perspective, looking at the field of HR, what are the bare minimum requirements that we need to be successful in the world of remote work? Let's see what he had to say.
Yeah, I think, you need to have, robust sort of solutions in place that allow you to adapt to this new ways of working. It's essential that organizations are able to respond rapidly, to keep the business as usual processes on track as far as possible. Whether your people are working from home or, in their usual workplace, they still need to be paid. I think this is where you need a really good, a robust payroll system, because organizations that have outdated payroll solutions are going to struggle to complete their pay runs on time. and make it a lot more difficult for employees who are already feeling the pinch, in some organizations. So as a minimum, I think that's what's needed. And there are other sort of capabilities that I think is also needed, especially if we look at the remote working situation. Having a well-integrated, intuitive time tracking software. I think it's one of the most essential tools that you're going to need for remote work. Keeping employees accountable for their breaks, their time, and it needs to be easy enough for them to use, and simple as operating a mobile phone. We need to have, I think, these simple solutions in place that make it easier for organizations to operate, for employees to utilize, without hindering their performance at work.
All right. So folks, don't forget to send your comments through. Don't forget to send your questions through. We are a live show, and it's very exciting when you start leading the show by participating. And then what I do is I work with our producer here to line up the right video in response to your comments or questions. So you help shape the show. You help shape the conversation. Now, what we did after that question is we went back to Rizan with an even tougher question, and we asked him for his thoughts on investment in HR systems, despite the fact that many companies are currently experiencing salary cuts. When we did that, we did put Rizan a little bit into the hot seat, and we were able to really get him to give us insight into a very difficult situation that a lot of people are facing during lockdown. And let's hear what he had to say.
I think that's a very good question, Kadushan, and it's so pertinent right now. Companies are looking at cutting costs, and they're cutting salaries down, and now you're asking them to go invest in technology and solutions, which comes at a cost as well. And that's a difficult sell to have, and a difficult conversation to have, internally in organizations. But I think there's different views on this. Studies have shown that, businesses that often experience HR problems, as a result, they lose their competitive advantage. And we know that, employees are an indispensable component of, the success of a business, and therefore shouldn't be ignored. The reality is that many businesses neglect the HR aspect of their business in varying degrees. Some businesses, especially small businesses, they view HR practices as costly, time-consuming, and it often typically leads them to start adopting informal HR practices, manual processes, having inadequate systems, and they're therefore poorly equipped to manage the operation and challenges that are related from an HR perspective. And ultimately, this can cost the business. What's the implications of not having the right tools in place to support your employees? Amongst other things, you could have high staff turnover, low morale, lack of skills, reduced motivation, and ultimately, it can affect productivity. So, rather than thinking about the cost of bolstering HR capabilities, I think companies need to start thinking about the cost of not making this investment. There's also a big misconception that HR software or solutions nowadays are very expensive. They're complex. A company has to implement this full suite of HR capabilities. It's going to take 9 to 12 months to implement, and companies don't really want to do that. The reality is that there are really good solutions out there that are inexpensive due to technological advancements in cloud computing. You've got subscription-based models that really make it affordable. Furthermore, companies no longer need to invest in a full suite of capabilities that's not needed, and they can focus on key capabilities that also make it more affordable for the company. Through best practice methodologies, business processes built into these solutions, we're seeing that implementation cycles are much shorter, and we're seeing solutions being completed within 8 weeks, depending on the capability. Ultimately, you need to identify the challenges or the pain points in the business and see, which areas can be focused on and where you can gain efficiencies. you put the right HR system or solution in place, it will slash overhead costs. It's going to increase productivity. It's going to, boost your employee efficiency. I think better yet, it will create a happier, more efficient employee. This in turn can translate into better customer experiences and ultimately, increase profits, which is what the organizations are looking for. Investing the right technology now, it's equivalent to investing, long term in your people and in their career growth, and also in the business itself. So if you commit to this type of investment, amidst this current crisis or future challenges, the benefits of this are going to be paid several times over through dedication and performance of from your employees. That they'll give back to the organization when things get back to normal. Yeah. I just want to add another last point here that it's possible to operate your organization virtually without any software, but it's tough. Businesses that focus on creating operational efficiencies, they can drive further competitiveness while also creating increased capacity in the organization. And we're seeing now, once we introduce now the pandemic that's coming to play now, remote working, that's also having a significant impact on your HR related processes and your HR teams. The burden has fallen. I think now through the pandemic, we're seeing that a lot of the burden is falling now onto the HR team and professionals. And without having modern HR software that is cloud-based, that can be accessed, anywhere on any device, you're going to find that the efforts to successfully work remotely is going to be hampered by the lack of technology. Just for example, taking an HR system with mobile app capabilities and having self-service capabilities, that alone is going to improve the efficiencies in the business. It's going to remove the bottlenecks. It's going to create a better, working environment. And ultimately, that will create efficiencies in the business and drive productivity.
Rizan, if I may add, Christian, I think I agree with what you're saying completely, right? But playing devil's advocate, these conversations tend to fall on deaf ears in the current environment where many executives will say to you, but those things are fluffy and they're nice to have, right? So I think we've got to turn the conversation into one of what is the consequence of you not doing anything right now, right? The COVID horizon is medium term at best. There's going to be an upturn. If organizations choose to remain where they are and try and sit it out and they don't cater for the future, they have a very real risk of becoming redundant, right? Let's just take, for example, my 13-year-old kid, right? I can tell you right now that when I can relate back to a job I started in 2006 where for the first 3 days I was given manuals to read. And I can tell you right now that my 13-year-old would walk out of that organization within half an hour because of the poor experience that he's had, right? Being used to a consumer-based environment that is real-time, that fulfills his needs, that is contextual to his particular needs. So that's one aspect of it, right? The other aspect is that what we're seeing at SAP is that, we're having to really because HR is seen as nice to have by many older executives, and I say that reservedly, without any negativity, is that, we're having to prove the real returns on investment. So I'll give you a quick example. We've embarked on projects with two major banks on the continent recently, and both of them, freed up the money or approved the money to fund these projects based on two things. The first thing was that we showed them what a reduction in time to productivity would mean. So both banks, have a large complement of staff that are revenue generating. So these are guys that sell loans. So we showed that an impact of reducing the time to productivity by 20% would mean a real return on investment in terms of these guys being able to generate revenue much sooner than anticipated, right? And that business case paid for the investment, right? And you kind of see the light switch on with the CFO and with the executive immediately. So that, that's one aspect. The other aspect is that, if we look at, I'll just quote a couple of quick statistics. The IDC says that organizations that focus on overall employee engagement deliver 3 times more revenue per employee, right? And organizations that focus on employee experience have 40% lower employee turnover than the average organization. Now, you'll agree that these types of things are, easily quantifiable in terms of the cost to the organization or the return on investment for an organization. So I think we need to turn these conversations into something that is meaningful and empirical for the individuals based on their KPIs and objectives. And we need to show them, the opportunity cost that's lost for them not doing something.
All right, a lot of good content in there. We also have some really nice questions coming through. Please keep them coming. Send through your comments on the Q&A box. Send it through on the chat box. We're more than happy to receive all questions and comments and feed it into the show so you can help shape the content of the show. Dominic is asking some good questions here. I think the second question was touched on in the last insert. So the question is, when is the best time to start implementing more structured HR systems? For startups, approximately 10 people, it often seems like more effort than it's worth. How do I convince our CEO that this structure is important? So we had a little bit of that conversation start with Shiraz in the earlier clip, where he went into the business case and we went into looking at the cost of having the system versus the cost of not. Definitely what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on our incidental expert guest, Razan, who I know is watching the show. If you wouldn't mind, Razan, just putting some of your thoughts and comments into the Q&A box or the chat box as well. And then that way we get to read some of your answers out if you want to comment. Thank you for that. And then Dominic's also asked here, what are your thoughts about soft power in the workplace? A concern is that in hybrid work environments, employees who go into the office regularly are more likely to be promoted due to proximity bias. How do we balance that and ensure there's no bias for management? Asking as a manager. Okay, so that's a really, really, really good question. And I personally want to give some of my own comment on that. I tell you what we're going to do. Here's what we'll do. We'll just roll with another insert, which I'm going to talk to you about, which I'll introduce in a second, and then we're going to get right back to that. If not during the inserts, I'm certainly going to give some of my own personal comment on that. In respect of the next insert, we have an executive from Dimension Data in South Africa, who is going to give his comments on what is the role of IT when it comes to the softer elements of humanity in the workplace. So there is a lot of the comments and questions coming through right now are more about the softer elements. We have Dom referring to something called proximity bias. There are far more softer elements in the workplace when it comes to people that extend beyond your very clinical workflow discussions, payroll conversations, etc., or even communication platforms. So from an IT point of view, how can IT start accounting for things like people's personalities, their moods, their emotions, the relationship aspects, and how can we do all of this without compromising the basic mandate of IT, which is to make sure that we have a secure environment and a secure place where people can connect and work safely without threats. Let's find out how this gets done.
So this personally totally resonates with me. I think that a flexible work style goes a long way in addressing some of the softer issues already. I think a perfect example is, Brian would prefer to work at 1 a.m. In his sweater, and the flexible work style gives him the opportunity to do that. So really things like, are you a morning or an evening person? When are you more productive? A flexible work style allows you to have that, to make your own decision with regards to that. Something that resonates with me, do you need a midday run or maybe a meditation session to recharge for the afternoon's work? I know that I've adopted that and it works really well. And then one I heard on a podcast this morning is, do you work better in your PJs or in your sweater? I'll leave that as an open-ended question. Another really interesting psychological thing is that it's been shown that introverted employees are much more likely to contribute in a group session when they can do it from the comfort of their own homes. So I think what you're doing there is that you're getting creative input from a personality type in your organization that has a lot to offer, but are maybe uncomfortable doing it, in a group where there's a lot of noisy people that are louder than they are. And I think that's fantastic. A flexible work style allows employees to tailor their day, so they now have the power of deciding, when they work, and really they're tailoring their day to achieve more and to contribute more. So to me, the technology that enables distributed flexible work, as well as the culture of distributed flexible work, really does talk to the softer issues, and like I said, resonates with me totally.
That was a super fun show. I really enjoyed that one when we got to interview Brian Madden and the team from Dimension Data. This is really bringing back memories for me. Really had a lot of fun doing that. All right, so let's keep the show on the road here, quite literally. We have some good questions coming through. And Kosanati is commenting here. In order to find the right talent to fill the gaps, the HR team needs to understand the sales strategy, which will include what is working well and what is not. Close communication with sales leaders will help HR to strengthen the team and build sales success over time. What metrics would you use to measure HR's success in this? Very, very, very good question there, and Kosanati, because now we're talking a little bit more about metrics. So a lot of cool stuff coming through. We're getting a lot more engagement from you, which is awesome. Just keep that coming through. Keep your questions coming through on the Q&A box and through the chat. And I'm going to do my best to just field all of this. What I want to do for a second before we jump too much into Kosanati's comment or question right this second, let's just hear what Rizan has to say here in the chat box regarding Dominic's earlier question. So Dominic made the question or made the point here about this concept of soft power in the workplace, which is all about, it could be based on proximity bias. If someone shows up at the office more than his or her peers, then there's a chance that that individual might win favor based on the closer relationship, etc. So let's have a look at what Rizan is saying over here. So Rizan says soft power, what managers are looking for now is employees getting the job done. This is where an effective cloud-based performance management solution is beneficial, and more importantly, one that offers continuous performance management and enables manager and employee to engage throughout the performance year and not only at the end of the cycle. Employees can track and update managers on activities in real time, ensuring transparency in the process, but this also allows for more structured conversations. So really good, well-developed answer there, Rizan. Really, really appreciate your input. I know we just, threw you into the hot seat there and you are playing ball, which is really fantastic. Now, I just want to comment, Dom, in terms of your broader question and this concept of proximity bias. I just want to call out that it is not the first time that we have a situation where some employees or an employee has the opportunity to get closer to the boss than others. Maybe prior to remote work, that might have been done by someone deciding to go running with the manager, or join the same team or go to the same school or whatever. So there's always opportunity for relationships to form that extend beyond the workplace that does open the door to potential bias. And this is just the way it is in the field of human relations. There's any God's quantity of ways for two people to form some kind of connection that extends beyond the workplace, whether it's now through proximity coming into the office, whether it's playing golf on the weekend, whether it's going to the same school. There's any God's quantity of ways to form a personal relationship that will extend beyond the business. My personal response to that, which aligns very nicely with what Rizan just said, is that ultimately, as a leader in an organization, there has to be one rule, and that is that the sole decision making around an employee has to be limited to the data associated with the employee's performance alone and no other important factor. So when looking and evaluating what the prospects for an employee should be, when looking at what should be done for an employee, what rewards are to be given to the employee, all of that should be based on a universal system that is entirely performance driven, that's metric driven. It should not be based on personal bias or relationship or any other such factor. So that's just a bit of a high-level comment from me on that, Dom. I know it's still pretty light, but of course, Razan went into a lot more depth there with his suggestion of using a better performance management system. And then, to perhaps comment on your earlier point, which is how do you go ahead and sell this to the boss? At the end of the day, the biggest weakness that an organization can build itself on is when opinion is admitted into the dealing of people. So even if especially if an organization is small and if they are constructing themselves from the start, they need to build the foundation of fairness and justice across all people. And the only way that can be achieved in the workplace is to build a business or a startup on the backbone of a performance-driven organization. So you get rewarded based on your performance, on what you achieve, on what you do. And the only way you can build a sane organization and a rapidly growing organization into the future is if you truly make it a meritocracy where everyone feels they have the opportunity to succeed, not based on who shows up on what day, not based on who goes to the golf course, but based entirely and squarely on who gets the job done in the highest quality and volume. And that's really all there is to a successful growing organization into the future. So the sales pitch to the CEO, even in the case of a startup, is don't wait until you hit 20 to 30 people before you start thinking about fair, equitable performance management and tracking of statistics and other metrics. Don't wait until it's too late, because then there's going to be so much catch-up work that's needed, and the growth even to that point is just going to be lengthened, the growth period. Whereas you could get there super fast if you really build the future of the company on the backbone of a completely equitable performance management system. All right, folks, so we're making a lot of progress. There's quite a lot of good questions coming through, lots of good comments coming through here. So before I go ahead and start taking more of these questions and comments, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to another insight that comes from our interview with Mellon Consulting. That's because we love Razan and team so much. They're playing ball. They're helping us out during the show. So we're going to go back to another insight from Mellon. And here we're going to talk about workflow. Here in this particular interview, we had Shiraz from SAP give his comment as well, as you would have seen in the prior clip as well. And in this particular insert, we talk about workflow and the importance and necessity of workflow in the context of a remote work environment. Let's see what Shiraz has to say.
So I think, in normal times, not having automated systems results in, inconsistent management system, right? So you have some managers that are really great with people, and an onboarding process, for example, is really rewarding to a new staff member, and others are not so good at it, or their interpersonal skills are not strong enough. So even take COVID out of the equation, I think the automation of processes results in a consistent management system, which means that every employee is entitled to the same way in terms of how they perceive the organization treating them, right? So I think it's really, really important that you create a consistency in terms of how you manage people, so that there's no favoritism. We use our own software. So for example, when we look at things like salary increases and performance bonuses and the like, it goes through a peer review system. It goes through, if I'm looking at salary increases for my employees, the system enables a peer review from, managers at my level, so that we make sure that the process is fair, so that everyone within the organization has full transparency into the process. There's no feeling that there's favoritism and so on. So I think, maybe that example answers your question, that even without COVID, there's a real need for consistent management system, which is only achievable through automating processes and a real, value-added HR system.
I just want to challenge you a little bit here.
Sure.
I want to just probe a little bit more into this point that you raised. A lot of businesses are, they're wary about trying the avant-garde. Especially at this time of change where so much has changed around the business, the customers have changed, the products have changed. We've had to pivot so many things. And especially, if you're a slightly smaller business, you're not this huge mammoth global conglomerate, you tend to think that certain aspects like peer reviews, it's just very avant-garde. It's a little bit unnecessary. If you could just tell us, what are the risks facing some of these businesses that either believe that it's too new, or possibly believe that's for the big guys, it's not for us? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's got to do with context, right? We've got to understand the context of the organization and the culture of the organization to understand what will work for them. So the peer review does not necessarily work in every organization, right? But if we look to further the aims of an organization, so if we tap into the key objectives of an organization, every organization, for example, will have the objective to improve staff turnover. Right. So how do we do that? And what is the cost of staff turnover? So I would take the questions to a very basic level in terms of what is the cost of not doing something, and what is the potential return if you change, a particular area of your business that is experiencing pain, right? Because, for example, staff turnover is probably the easiest example that you can use. When you lose a staff member, it's not only a case of you not having a staff member on board for 2 or 3 months, but it's a case of losing 6 months in terms of training the next staff member. It's the collateral damage of losing key relationships between that staff member and your customers, and the impact on the customer service, and the resulting impact on your ability to derive revenue. So I think that those are the ways that I would answer that question. And it goes back to my earlier point about what is the cost of doing nothing. Those are always the questions that we need to have. So it's not a case of, a lot of organizations will say, we're not going to transform. What is the use of transforming? And that's the level of detail that I would get to in terms of answering that question.
All right. Well, I really hope you're enjoying this new format of a show. This is a compilation episode. We've looked through and found the tidbits that we felt would be most relevant based on your comments, your feedback, your questions, that we felt would be most relevant to HR practitioners, business leaders, entrepreneurs, etc. out there. So the only way we know whether we're getting it right or not quite would be through your survey feedback. So make sure you complete your survey feedback, your webinar feedback. It's super fast. It's a very quick form. Send through your comments if you feel like something should be improved, if you feel like we should be covering better topics, if you want to engage further with any of the speakers. Yes, I understand that these are historical clips, and by historical I mean they're just from the past. It's not even old. So at any point, if you feel you want to do further engagement with any of the individuals or companies that you see on this particular show, feel free to give me a shout. Let us know in the webinar feedback description that that's what you'd like to do afterwards, and we will make it happen. All right, so now let's go back to our comments and questions here. Rizan has been very kind, very generous. He keeps giving us answers to a lot of the difficult questions that we have coming through. Let's see what Rizan has to say here. Time to implement structured HR systems. Sooner rather than later. Need to assess needs and what the issues are. Start small and focus on areas that need to be addressed. Example, payroll, performance management, leave management, recruitment, succession, etc. Structured systems will save HR admin time as well as create a better employee engagement. How to convince the CEO? I think this goes back to Dom's point. Get a value-based assessment done that looks at costs versus benefits, and more importantly, cost of not taking the leap. Yeah, I think that Shiraz did a good job of explaining that as well and giving context behind that thinking. Okay, so great feedback, great engagement, great answers. I want to make sure that we don't leave Nkosanati entirely in the lurch here. There's a very good question that's come through that I want to just make sure we cover before we move on. And it's about assessing the success of HR in strengthening the team and the business. And in this particular instance, Nkosanati mentions the concept of, or the area of sales And the example here is related to sales, but it actually can apply to many different functional areas within the organization. If HR is working super hard to enable the team and to get the team going by working with the sales leaders, by strengthening the team, by building sales success over time, what metrics can we then use to show the impact of HR? And I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a very similar theme that we keep bringing up here, and that is the fact that we need to have a system to measure performance in the first place. That is the critical success factor for the organization as a whole. We do need to have some kind of performance platform. An organization cannot expect to continue to thrive, do well, especially in turbulent times, in the absence of some system that measures the outputs of an employee's work. So yes, we are all busy, we are all doing cool stuff, but at the end of the day, we need something that tracks the outputs, the end result of all the hard efforts of all of our employees. And that is the performance system. That is the single platform that is the go-to platform to detect and evaluate how well we are performing at an individual level and at a company level. So to your point then, Nkosanathi, if this is in place, and if we find that through interventions made by HR, different areas of the business, we are able to track the metrics, the KPIs, the statistics of an area, and we are able to see, okay, good, this is the before scene, then there's an HR intervention, and this is the after scene. You can see date coincident to HR going in and helping out. It becomes very visible and very obvious what the impact of HR is in the organization. Now, you might elect that you have an ongoing metric that you can use to measure yourself. That is, give some kind of organizational health across all of the KPIs of the organization. You could elect to do that, which is an ongoing monitoring metric. However, you could also just look at the before and after snapshot in a particular situation, before HR intervention, after HR intervention, and you can list out the program that was implemented. It could comprise, some learning and development. It could comprise other actions, using the other HR tools that are available. And then afterwards, you can go and monitor and log what was the net change in the statistics or metrics or KPIs of the business. I hope that covers your question, Nkosanathi. And if there's anything else that you want to communicate, anything else that you want to follow up on, feel free to either take it up during the show or include your question or your follow-up in the feedback form. And if you do that, we will be sure to respond to each and every person, not just you, but everyone who has a follow-up. We will respond personally to you and make sure that we cover your topic with you, even if it means us picking up the phone and giving you a ring. All right, folks, so we are making some good progress here. On that note, let's see what our next video has in store for us. We asked quite an interesting question, a simple yet interesting question. Are employees in today's world being treated better or worse than, say, a year ago? Let's see what Shiraz had to say about this.
I think it's hard to answer that in a blanket way. I would answer it from two perspectives. I think there's a truth to that when it comes to blue collar employees, right? Because typically blue collar employees are treated as commodities, unfortunately, and their needs are not always taken into account in the same way as professional services or white collar employees or professional those with professions are. So I think there's two sides to that question. So I think on the one hand, it's probably exacerbated the situation in terms of the negative experience of employees in the blue collar space, but in the white collar space, I think it's probably improved the situation because there's a lot more of a feeling of that we need to look after our staff to ensure that we hold on to the key staff. And there's also a diminishing talent pool, I believe. If you talk to a lot of people, there's a lot of folks who are wanting to leave the country. They believe that the situation is untenable. So I think there's a real dichotomy in terms of the answer to that question.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So what would you say are the risks to employers, the actual people risk to employers?
So I think, as I said earlier, if we take into account the bank that I spoke of earlier, we know amongst the big banks that there's a lot of movement. It's very fluid in terms of the war for talent, right? So I think from that perspective, it's really important that, and they understand that it's important that they see their employees, their key staff through this period by supporting them in a way that they feel that there's loyalty towards them in terms of the employees, right? So that they retain key staff throughout this. So I think that's a key feature of what we're seeing amongst professional services, banks, and white collar firms and employers. Another aspect maybe to consider is that many organizations have processes, right? But they're predicated on folks being in the office, so they're very manual processes, right? So in this forced transition, I think one of the aspects that's really been highlighted is that while many organizations struggle to get approvals for HR programs, right, where they institute automation of HR processes, it's becoming understood by the executives that having these processes and these automated systems in place has become really important during these times, right? Because when you can't see your employees face to face, it becomes important, to manage things as simple as leave requests or as complex as performance, management processes. And I think also, providing a digital platform for collaboration provides two, big pieces of value to employers. One is that you help employees to remain engaged, and the second thing is that you create a system of subtle accountability to make sure that people are engaged and productive, and you can understand the contribution of each of the team members to a particular project.
Yeah.
So I think those aspects are important to consider as well.
Absolutely. And I think, Shiraz, to just add to what you're saying, I think, we do sometimes underestimate the importance or the value of person-to-person interaction. Sometimes we take for granted that working alongside someone, we are able to tell, are they having a good day? Are they having a not so good day? Are they in a bad mood? We're able to tell if they're productive or if they're wasting time. We're able to tell what their attitude is towards their work. And all of these things are very subliminal. It's possibly things that we do or that we observe without even realizing that we're picking up all of this wonderful information when we are working on site together as a team. And I think that the push towards remote work, I definitely support it as a tech guy, as someone who is all about being productive wherever one is. I definitely support the notion, but I think sometimes we neglect some of the subtleties that occur in the workplace that makes it so much easier for us to stay in good communication with those around us. And there will be an increased dependence on manual systems to override this or to work around these things that are very native as part of our communication amongst us human beings. We're going to have to find solutions around it. We may have to depend a little bit more on a more formal performance management system if we don't have the luxury of just being able to experience our coworkers. Would you say that that's fair?
I think that's fair, and I think we need to be careful as well to not institute policing measures, right? So we don't want our employees to feel that they're being overly policed because they've been forced to work remotely. So I think the subtlety of creating an environment that's conducive to collaboration is the way to do it, right? Because in that way, a manager can see the contribution of each of the team members to a team task, as an example, and foster a feeling of belonging, of engagement amongst the employees, and potentially picking up the sentiments of those employees that are struggling to work remotely. Because not everyone is built to work in this fashion. People, a lot of people, I speak to a lot of my colleagues who feed off working with people face to face. So those are some of the things that I think we need to take into account as well.
All right, we've done well here. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of amazing content. For me, it was an absolute pleasure going through all of these historical clips. It's been a lot of fun just actually going down memory lane a little bit and picking up on the golden nuggets that we collected over the last year and a bit. You've definitely done a fantastic job by participating through the show, by giving us your comments and your questions. If there's anything that I've missed along the way, we will be sure to come back to you on an individual basis after the show. And to make it super easy for us to contact you, please complete a webinar survey. The link has been sent a few times now in the chat box. You will also find that you can go to our YouTube channel and you can ensure that you yourself go and investigate all of our content, the full videos that contain the full interviews. Obviously, we've pulled out tiny pieces which might sometimes leave the door open to misunderstanding because, you know, it's taken out of context. So if you really want to understand the full context, go back to the original video, go to our show page. You can go to tablemannersforrobots.com. You can also go to Kirushin.com and you can access the show page from there. That will take you through to the YouTube channel. We cannot ask enough that we need your support. We bring this show to you, produced locally. We try our best to add a local flavor to all of our content. We interview people from all around the world, and we really want to be a top quality platform for you right here in South Africa. So we ask for your support. Follow us on Spotify or Apple Music, whatever you prefer. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Really, let's bring a lot of support for this initiative, because we want to be successful, because we are deeply committed to bringing high quality content to you. James has asked a question here, which I don't believe we've fully gotten to. It says here, where does tech enablement come in? We have staff that have it waxed and the staff that really struggle with the tech side. For example, having a good mic and camera setup and being efficient in platforms like Teams. And he adds at the end, age comes into it. I mean, obviously we want to, be wary of like getting too much into the generalizations, because sometimes, I mean, I've worked with a number of people, and I'm speaking here on behalf of the slightly more mature community. I'm gray enough. I think I've earned my place in the mature community at this point. Speaking on behalf of this community, I do believe, the tech literacy does vary quite a bit. It's not necessarily perfectly congruent that older people are less tech savvy. Having said that, I think that the general observation is fair, and we do find that the issue between the very tech savvy and the very tech not so savvy, the difference between these two populations has become very stark during the period of remote work, and this is a challenge. And I think that we have to treat this challenge, or we have to treat this divide, in much the same way as we treat any other competency differential that we experience in organizations. So where we see a gap between two groups of people from a competency point of view or from a skills perspective, we have to solve that skills gap through training, through enablement initiatives, through preparation, learning and development programs, whatever. It could be something as simple as just getting people enrolled into online training. It could be more complex. It could be more in depth. It could involve some on-site work. Whatever. The point is that it still falls into the area of learning and development, and it's all about closing yet another skills gap that has become more prominent based on the situation that we all find ourselves in. All right, so that's a little bit of my random commentary. I don't see any other immediate things for my attention right here on the screen in front of me. Dominic says, useful insights. Thanks, KG. It's an absolute pleasure. Great engaging with you on the show. And in general, I'm just very excited about this new format of show. I really hope that you find it valuable too. I really like the fact that we have the opportunity to engage with you, to tackle your questions live on air while referring back to very useful clips from our toolkit and from our arsenal that we've built over the last year. I think that for me, this is a great way every now and then for us to check in and make sure that we continue to learn from all of the hard work that we've done before. We don't always have to just keep reinventing the wheel here. We can just keep learning from what we've already accumulated over time. On that note, thank you so much for joining. Be sure to subscribe across all of the platforms that are relevant to you. Let's keep the show growing. Let's make it a huge success, and I will see you soon.